The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Immediately came up to us and told us
Tell you how people here, because the senator from Illinois will remember, I introduced legislation to rename the street. How can we move these nominees forward? How can we move them forward? I said, it's very simple. Pass my legislation and I'll lift the hold. The Democratic caucus didn't like that, but they ultimately agreed. And so the legislation I introduced to rename the street in front of the Chinese embassy, Lujiabao Plaza, passed this body unanimously. Now, ultimately, the House didn't take it up and pass it up, but I'll tell you how that story ends. That story ends in 2017 when I was sitting down with Rex Tillerson for breakfast at Foggy Bottom, the new U.S. Secretary of State, and when he spoke to his Chinese counterparts, he said, they have come back and said among their top 3 diplomatic objectives with us is stop your bill to rename the street in front of the embassy. They are terrified by the sunlight and sunshine on the dissidents. At the time, Liu Xiaobo had passed, but his widow, Liu Xia, was still in China, still wrongfully held back. And I told Secretary of State Tillerson, I said, I'll tell you what, you tell the Chinese, if they release Liu Xia, if they let her get out, I'll stop pressing this particular bill. And if they don't, I'll keep pressing it and we'll pass it again because we've already done it. Within weeks, China released Liu Xia. So you ask, how does this help the people in prison? By not having Hollywood media. And the Chinese Communist Party engages in yet another horror. My Democratic colleagues like to say on the question of abortion they are pro-choice. Well, the Chinese Communist government right now is engaging in forced sterilizations and forced abortions, taking Uyghur mothers and forcing them to abort their children against their wills. Whatever the Democrats' views on abortion in the United States as a matter of a woman's choice, surely they must be united in saying a government forcing a woman to abort her child, to take the life of her unborn child, is an unspeakable atrocity. So the SHAME Act does something very simple. It imposes sanctions on the Chinese Communist government leaders responsible for implementing this horrific 1984-style policy of forced sterilizations and forced abortions. Now, I had intended to seek unanimous consent for the SHAME Act as well, but my Democratic colleagues have said they're not yet able to find a Democrat to object, although my understanding is they intend to. I hope they reconsider that. A terrific ending for today's debate would be passing the SHAME Act and saying we're all standing together against forced abortions and grotesque human rights violations. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't. But let's find out where we are on the question of the SCRIPT Act.
Senator from Connecticut.
Reserving the right to object. I think we've gone a little bit far afield from the 6 pro-democracy activists living abroad.
From Connecticut, I have not yet yielded the floor, and I'm about to ask the unanimous consent, so...
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 3835 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that this bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object on the Scripps Act, which I understand is the only measure so far on which the senator from Texas is seeking unanimous consent. Very simply, he knows, I know, we all know, that measure will never reach the President's desk. There's simply no way it can pass both houses of Congress in the next few days before the end of this Congress. The only way we can do something for the freedom fighters and democracy advocates in communist China is to pass this measure that he has objected to, which has unanimously passed the House of Representatives. Only H.R. 8428 offers that opportunity. And frankly, only this measure that he's objected to does anything for the dissidents or the democracy advocates or the freedom fighters directly. He's talking about movies. We're talking about human lives. He can draw all the kind of hypothetical connections between the so-called movie moguls in Hollywood and China, but I think his Scripps Act actually works against the goal that he is advocating. Censorship in China is a legitimate concern, no question about it. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with him on a bill that does something about it. But actually, his bill not only takes away the support for the movies that may be made, it takes away support from documentaries about the repressive regime in China. It takes away classification and other security screening that is necessary for those kinds of movies to be shown in this country. I think that kind of obstacle may be inadvertent on his part, but I welcome the chance to work with him on a bipartisan bill, a truly bipartisan bill that, in fact, in the next Congress could reach the President's desk. This one that he's offering, the Scripps Act, goes nowhere. But I just want to bring us back to the reality that really is at issue here. Just last Wednesday afternoon of this week, 2 of the activists among the 6 pro-democracy fighters living abroad, charged under China's new national security law, were before our committee. I'm wondering what they are thinking when they hear my colleague from Texas pounding the table about being tough on China, but objecting to a bill that guarantees them protection. As I say, I'm talking about their lives and tens of thousands of others. I'm not talking about movies. I'm not talking about Hollywood moguls. Let's stand up for the lives of those Chinese Hong Kong freedom fighters now in this country seeking protection through a bill passed unanimously by the House of Representatives, the only bill that will go to the President's desk if we approve it. Thank you.
Is there objection? The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
3 brief observations. Number 1, the senator from Connecticut said multiple times that the House bill in question passed the House unanimously. I am sure this is inadvertent, but what the senator from Connecticut said is simply wrong. It passed the House by voice vote, which is a very different thing from passing unanimously. It simply means the vote tally was not recorded. Secondly, the senator from Connecticut said the Scripps Act is not going to pass this Congress. Well, That appears to be correct. But that is for one reason and one reason only, which is the final two words uttered by the senator from Connecticut. I object. Quite literally by doing nothing. Quite literally by giving the identical speech he had just given and then closing his mouth before those final two words. Had that occurred, the Script Act would have passed this body unanimously. So the only reason the Script Act isn't passing is because the Senate Democrats are objecting. And it should not be lost on anybody that the Hollywood billionaires who are enriching themselves with this Chinese propaganda are among the biggest political donors to today's Democratic Party in the entire country. Senator from Connecticut said, well, the Script Act might make it possible to have documentaries on the human rights abuses in China. Oh, really? That argument staggers the mind. It so defies reality because, you know what? Hollywood doesn't make movies about the human rights abuses in China. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to meet Richard Gere. Now, Richard Gere is not someone you would ordinarily imagine palling around with a conservative Republican from Texas, but Richard Gere was up here. He was up here actually standing up against Chinese abuses and urging anyone who would listen, Republican or Democrat, to stand with him. You know, Richard Gere has not made a single major Hollywood movie in a decade. Why? Because he dared stand with Tibet. And the Hollywood billionaires blackballed Richard Gere. If you speak out for Tibet, if you do what the senator from Connecticut just suggested and discuss the Chinese human rights abuses, it doesn't matter that Richard Gere used to be an A-list Hollywood blockbuster actor. Boom, his career's dead because no studio will produce a movie with him because he spoke the truth. And by the way, my bill presents zero barriers to someone actually making a documentary on the human rights abuses in China, because presumably if you're making that documentary, you wouldn't allow the Chinese Communist government to censor it. I don't know what kind of documentaries the senator from Connecticut is familiar with, but I'm not familiar with documentaries done on tyrants in concentration camps where you let the concentration camp guards edit out the stuff they don't like. That ain't a documentary. Senator from Connecticut said perhaps we can work together in a bipartisan manner to address this. I hope so. Standing together against the oppression of the Chinese communists would be a very good thing for the United States Senate. It would be a very good thing for our country. Unfortunately, at least today, that hasn't yet happened. I yield the floor.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, the only ones happy with the outcome of today's debate are the Chinese government. And I regret this outcome because there probably was a time when we would have cooperated in a bipartisan way on both of these measures. And it may not have been unanimous. There may have been a few contrary votes in the House, but clearly it came here with bipartisan support. And I regret that the outcome today is not bipartisan agreement to protect those freedom fighters who came before the Judiciary Committee and who have risked their lives. This issue is not going away. It will be back, because, fortunately, the activists from Hong Kong will persist in their fight. And we ought to do everything we can to make sure they have a safe haven in this country and that they are protected here. So my closing plea to my colleague from Texas is that maybe there remains time even in this session. But if not, we need to take a stand as a nation against Chinese censorship, against repression by the Chinese, and come together and work together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President,
Senator from Florida.
first thing I'd like to do is comment on the discussions we just had. You know, I've been up here a little less than 2 years, and the thing that surprises me is invariably the Democrats won't stand up against the Communist Party of China. The case that we're dealing with now is, you know, they don't want to, they're going to stand up for Hollywood rather than rights that we have here that I'm going to talk about in a second. Whether, you know, we ought to be standing up against people, Communist China Party stealing our jobs, our technology, attacking, Communist Party for what they've done to Uyghurs, for organ harvesting, for taking away the basic rights of Hong Kong citizens. And invariably, I watch my Democrat colleagues, they won't stand up against Communist China. I don't understand it. This is a party that clearly wants to dominate our society, our way of life. They are completely disagree with our way of life. And I want to thank Senator Ted Cruz for his continued fight for rights, for all the rights that we have in this country, but fighting for those rights so people whether in Hong Kong or in Communist China or in Taiwan, have the same freedoms that we have. So I want to thank Senator Ted Cruz for showing up today and doing this. Today what I'm going to talk about is religious freedom. Religious liberty is our first freedom under the Constitution of the United States. Americans have the right to freely exercise religion, a sacred right that I will always fight for. There is no pandemic exception to the First Amendment. Unfortunately, we've seen liberal governors and mayors across the country use the coronavirus pandemic to go after churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship. For months, they've argued that houses of worship should not meet and congregants could not sing. They've condemned in-person worship services as a threat to public safety, all while they've applauded massive political protest. We saw it happen right here in the nation's capital. Mayor Bowser refused to grant a waiver to the Capitol Hill Baptist Church for religious gatherings, but supported mass protests that violated her own orders. The church had to sue the city in federal court for the right to gather, and the court ruled in favor of the church. It's simply hypocritical and unconstitutional to target religious institutions while letting other businesses operate. We know those on the left will take every opportunity to infringe on Americans' First Amendment rights, but we won't let it happen. This year has been challenging, and for many of us, our faith and our community have helped us through it. Government doesn't have a right to take this away from American citizens. I'm proud to lead a resolution today with 15 of my colleagues to call out those who have wrongly tried to prevent Americans from practicing their faith. This is about rights granted to Americans under our Constitution. What's the one thing every American believes in and has agreed to uphold is our Constitution, which we have each sworn to uphold as elected officials also. We each took the same oath of office. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter, so help me God. There is no reason anyone should object to upholding our Constitution. I will always fight for the religious liberty of all Americans, and I look forward to my colleagues passing this important resolution today. However, I now am going to wait because I understand one of my Democrat colleagues is going to come object to upholding the Constitution and the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights. It's just shocking to me.
Senator from Florida.
As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 806 submitted earlier today. Further, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, my colleague, Senator Scott, has chosen an interesting point in this pandemic to object to public safety measures intended to protect human life and ensure scarce resources are not squandered. Over 17 million Americans, 17 million, have contracted COVID that we know of. And over 300,000 of our friends and our neighbors and loved ones are no longer with us. Think about that. September 11th was a great national tragedy. I know because I lost 700 of those 3,000 citizens on that fateful day from New Jersey. This is 100 times more than what happened on September 11th. The people we have lost are not just some nameless numbers, but mothers and fathers and grandparents. Essential parts of our hearts are gone forever due to the pandemic that has been mishandled and mismanaged from the start. And now when this virus is running unchecked through our communities, we have before us this resolution that is riddled with misstatements of fact that I find deeply concerning. No governor wants to see their constituents cut off from their daily lives. And I think we can all agree that the administration here in Washington, their inability to guide us through this crisis has left our governors holding the bag when it comes to securing resources, providing guidance, and making the difficult calls about the right public policy to prevent COVID-19 from rampaging like an unchecked bull in a china shop through our states. Because they know that the governors of our states, that the lives of their residents, our neighbors, brothers, sisters, children, and parents rest in their hands, and these difficult decisions they must make. We are still losing Americans from COVID-19 at an unprecedented rate. Hospitals throughout the country are providing an amazing level of care with exhausted providers and continued resource
Hello?
Hey, Bill, I can hear you.
Okay, I think it's the same issue again, where they can't hear us. Can they hear you?
They may not have connected us yet, though, Bill.
Okay.
Supervisor Gates, Supervisor Tukri, this is Joy.
Hey,
Can you
Steve.
hear
Hi,
me?
Bill.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Joy. Hi, Joy. This is Andrea. I can hear all of you.
Okay, thank you.
As usual,
Yeah, that's right.
it's a special club.
Okay.
Joy, I understand that last time they ended up calling the supervisors who were remote on their cell phones and recording their votes that way.
Yeah, last time I
Bill?
just gave up and just watched the webinar or the YouTube.
Might be because you're not transmitting, but you can. Or Bill Gates, can you hear me at this point?
I can, yes.
Okay, I just you, Steve. Let's try you again. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, and I just heard you. So
Good.
we'll see what happens when we put it on public transmittal. Let's hold on for.
They are the same source. Right. Not that they don't come from the same place.
I don't have the ability.
You guys have the ability.
Deb, can you hear us?
I don't have the ability.
Yes, Fran, we are live on the webinar.
And can you see us on the clerk's feed?
I do not see it live on the clerk's feed. I'll go check the control room.
They have the control room, Scott Konecki, that's Fields.
When we go into open session.
Otherwise, there's no live feed that goes.
Right.
We're just still working on, you guys, we're just still working on some technicalities, I think, just to make sure that everything goes properly this time around with the public feed. So please.
The webinar.
So I'm going to go ahead and take us now out of executive session, and we are now in open session. I can see my colleagues do the pandemic again. You can everyone is socially distant. And thank you, Tom, for being here. Fran, my colleagues, Steve Chukri and Supervisor Gates are currently in home offices. So thank you for joining us all the way through executive session, gentlemen. I will now be looking for item number, I believe it's actually number 2 on this one, but we'll take that one first. An agreement with the town of Carefree regarding one Arizona opioid settlement. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Sellers.
I move that we approve the agreement with Town of Carefree on the one opioid Arizona settlement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor. Now I'll give it to Supervisor Gallardo. He just barely beat you. Okay, I do have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, thank you, Paul. Any opposed? And motion carries unanimously. We'll now move back to item number 2, possible action, discussion related to election litigation and other related election matters, I believe. Well, that was part of the discussion in executive, but looking for a motion there.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Vice Chairman Sellers.
I move that we authorize the county attorney to respond to the subpoenas issued by the Senate by filing a complaint in Superior Court and by sending a letter to the Senate as directed in executive session.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Sellers. Do I hear a second?
Second that motion.
Second.
Well, I'll give it to Supervisor Gates that time because he's out there in cyber world. So Supervisor Gates, second the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to be able to make it.
Oh, would you want to make a comment before the vote?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Thank you.
Supervisor Gallardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the dialogue that we've had. I do want to say this. First of all, I want to once again thank our election workers, our staff. So many, if not thousands, of individuals participated and volunteered on Election Day, November 3rd, to do what we have always done, and that is provide an election that was safe, fair, and accurate. These hardworking workers are both Republicans and Democrats and independents, and they have done everything they can to ensure that all voters had the right to cast their ballot, to exercise that most fundamental right we have, the right to vote. And those ballots were counted and they were accurately tabulated. I want to say that. So thank you to all the hard work employees at our election office and those that are from both political parties that volunteered on that election day, November 3rd. That's first. Second, I do want to say a big thank you to our attorney, Tom Liddy, our elections director for election day voting, Scott Jarrett, and yourself, Mr. Chairman. All three of you willingly went to the legislature and participated in a hearing, a very long hearing, 6 or so hours, in which you addressed every possible question there in public to the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was not one question that anyone dodged. There was not one question that was not answered. Every question was answered, and any type of allegations of fraud or election tampering was debunked and knocked down, and that was fact. Anyone can go online and watch the hearing and see that was the case. And I do want to thank you all for spending more than 6 hours answering questions by this legislative committee. That's number 2. The third point is my disappointment. I served in the legislature. I know quite a few of the members that are still there. I have good friends on both sides of the aisle, but I am disappointed in the Senate Judiciary Chair. I know him well. I served with him while he was Judiciary Chair in the House. I served on his actual committee, the House Judiciary Committee, served with him throughout my tenure at the House as he was. But I am very disappointed of the subpoenas that were sent over to the county. I believe he knows better. He's an attorney. He's a very experienced lawmaker. He's been there for a very long time, and he is very smart. I'll be the first to say he is one of the most smartest members of the legislature walking down there, and he knows better. And when I see a subpoena that was sent over that the public has had an opportunity to see, it really shows that they have gone to new lengths to not only serve a subpoena to a governmental entity, but be so far out of bounds in their subpoena. So I am very disappointed in the Senate Judiciary Chair. He knows better. The final point I want to make is to the people of Maricopa County. Many of our constituency in all 5 districts went out on election day, either early voting or on election day, and they cast the ballot. They know that they're casting a ballot in an election that is safe, secure, and modern. And how they know that is that back at the beginning of this year, this body, this Board of Supervisors worked in a bipartisan manner with our county recorder, Adrian Fontes, and thank you, Adrian Fontes, for your service. But we worked in a bipartisan manner to renegotiate a contract between the county recorder and the Board of Supervisors. We all agreed to it in a bipartisan manner. We worked together in a bipartisan manner to come up with new procedures for all 3 elections, the presidential primary, our primary, and our general. All 3 elections, new procedures, new resources to the tune of millions of dollars in a new taxation system, all in a bipartisan manner to make sure that we had a successful election, and it was. We had no complaints in the primary. We had no complaints in our presidential primary, and we had no complaints in our general election until 2 days after the election. That's when the complaints started coming. I've always believed that our department, our elections department, was up to the task to pull off an election in unprecedented times during a pandemic, and they were successful. And I congratulate everyone that participated in that election. I can tell you that as a former election employee and now current member of the Board of Supervisors, I expect that there will always be criticism from folks that do not like the outcome of the election. I expect that. You're always going to have it. We've had it in every election. For those that are not successful, are usually the first to point and criticize. But yet, at the end of the day, the fact is we had a safe, secure election, as we have always had in every year. We had an election that had the largest historic turnout that we have had, and everyone had the opportunity to cast their ballot, and everyone's ballot was tabulated. It was certified by a Republican governor, a Republican attorney general, and a Secretary of State. This whole election has been bipartisan, with both parties certifying that the election is over, it is complete, and it is accurate. And I think that for the people of Arizona, rest assured that that is the truth. And I believe that vast majority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents believe the election was accurate, complete, and it is over. Now, unfortunately, we have some folks that will never accept the election. No matter what happens, they'll never accept the election. The only thing I can tell them is, as I have told publicly to the Senate President, that I do support having some form of an audit. I do support having some type of a discussion with all the stakeholders, with both political parties, the Secretary of State, and members of the legislature, should they want to participate. But we do it
when litigation is over. We do it when all the legal issues are resolved. We sit down and we do it right. I want to be able to have an audit where everyone could look at and say, you know what? Maricopa County did an excellent job, had a historic time, and our machines, our investments, our policies worked on November 3rd, and it has once again proven that our system is correct. We have done 3 LNAs, 3 LNA, logic and accuracy tests. These tests are performed before, after the election to prove to both political parties who have signed off on that LNA that the election and the machines were accurate. Unfortunately, we have these sideshows now coming from the legislature, and I respect many of them are my former colleagues there at the Capitol. I respect what they're trying to, I guess, attempt to do, but I'm not interested in playing games. I'm not interested in this political theater. I'm not interested in trying to satisfy a small group of loud participants at the expense of a certified tabulation system. I'm not interested in trying to do a sideshow when it comes to the information to the millions of voters. I want to be able to move forward. I believe this election is over. I want to be able to conduct an audit just to continue to prove faith in our election system, but we don't do it in the middle of a circus that the legislature wants to entertain, and we don't do it in the middle of court hearings. I am interested in an audit. I am interested in doing it in a bipartisan manner in which we have conducted this entire election as, but we do it at a later date. And at that time, I would be totally supportive of doing an audit with all the stakeholders, but we do it right, not in the middle of a legislative circus and a legislative sideshow. Mr. Chairman, I support the motion moving forward, and I look forward to continue to working with the legislature, but we're not, or at least I'm not interested in political sideshows. Thank you.
Well, as always, we appreciate your passion, Supervisor Gallardo. You do make those points awfully well for you and your district, your constituency. So I appreciate it. Being that Supervisor Gallardo wanted to make a statement prior to his vote, I'm going to leave that option open then to the rest of my board. So I will go one by one. Supervisor Chukri.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
I can. You're coming loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too have some concerns about what was brought forward in the subpoenas. And I certainly understand the need, and I think it's important to get clarity from the courts along those lines. For example, releasing people's private resident addresses, date of birth. That is concerning to me. To put out in the public sphere. And quite honestly, some of the other things asked for, including what I just mentioned, I'm not even sure we can do legally. So I think it's important to get clarity. However, I also believe, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, and I respect all of you, that as you know, for some time I've believed in an audit. And notwithstanding what Mr. Gallardo just said, and I certainly understand his sentiment, and understand that legal issues need to be resolved before an audit can go forward, or else it could be perceived as tampering with evidence. I understand all of those. However, I do not think it can be done in isolation. I've said that several times, in that we simply do what is before us today without coupling that with at least directing our team to start the beginnings of what an audit would look like. Making sure that an independent certified election auditor is available to start to begin the workings of scope of work for an audit. So I will not be supporting this measure today because of those issues, and primarily because I think it should be coupled, today's motion, with an audit So that is my thought process, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you affording me the time to communicate my position. Thank you.
Okay, so to be clear, you were voting no on the motion for a complaint.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Supervisor Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo many of the comments that Supervisor Chukri just made. I think that it is incumbent upon this body to conduct an audit, and I do think that that is very important because I want people in Maricopa County to understand we're not trying to hide anything. This group believes in transparency. That's why there's already been the hand count audit. That's why there's already been the LNA test that Supervisor Gallardo referenced. So I'm very much supportive of conducting a third-party audit once these lawsuits have been concluded. But that's really not the nature of the motion that's in front of us today. We received a subpoena from the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, someone who I respect. And this subpoena asked us to produce a significant amount of electronic documents by 5 p.m. today. We received this just a few days ago, just after you, Mr. Chair, went down and testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee +1. And I thank you for going and testifying there. And I also thank the representative of the County Attorney's Office, Tom Liddy, and Scott Jarrett for participating in that. But let's be clear, these subpoenas that have been issued and are before this body are truly extraordinary in the breadth of information that they're looking for. And let's be clear what they're looking for. As a conservative, I feel strongly about individual private information of individuals, of voters, and that information has been requested in these subpoenas. And I'm going to fight to protect that information before we turn it over. Now, when I say that, I will be supporting this motion to get clear direction from the courts. I'm not willing to turn it over without the court speaking very clearly on how we're going to protect that private information. And I know all of my colleagues share my concerns about this information of our voters. It's so important. It's a solemn duty that we have as members of the Board of Supervisors. Now, again, if we did what the Senate Judiciary Committee has asked and turned over this private information to them, along with other documents, electronic documents, I don't know what they're going to do with it. They've not made it clear to me. And until we have a court step in and say very specifically how this information might be utilized, again, I will be supporting filing this complaint in the Superior Court and to get some clarity on how we move forward. But let me be very clear. I'm very supportive of the transparent measures that Maricopa County has taken already and that we will certainly take, I have no doubt, in a third-party audit. We want our residents to have confidence in our election system, and all three of these elections have been handled excellently by our elections department, and I have no doubt that Maricopa County will continue to do so in the future, and I'm sure that we're going to learn lessons when we do this third-party audit that will put us in a position, given the principles of continuous improvement, to do an even better job in the future. Thanks so much, Mr. Chair.
So, Bill, I'm going one by one. Is your vote for aye? Are you an aye vote? Okay.
I am, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Chairman Sellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I agree with virtually everything that's already been said by the other supervisors. I feel that we, in an extremely challenging time, really did an excellent job of putting on a fair, honest election. And it's been so frustrating to me that because of the various legal challenges that we've been with, we've not been able to really address some of the questions as openly as we would like to. I look forward to getting past all this so that we can, in fact, provide the information openly in public to prove that what we did was, as in the words of Supervisor Chukri, the best in class. So thank you. And my vote is aye.
Thank you. I had a hand in writing a letter back. The legislature invited me, both the House, Rusty Bowers, Representative Toma, as well as Senate President Fan and Mr. Senator Leach, to come and talk to them as the concerns were happening. And I appreciated that. I appreciated the ability to talk to basically both houses of the legislature at the same time. And I've never quite grasped what occurred. I guess I was invited again to what I thought would be a joint committee to talk about their issues that they've had with the election, and then it turned a little bit, and then it just became certain people of the Senate, and I thought I was there to answer, and I asked my team, Mr. Liddy and Mr. Jarrett, to come and talk about that. I asked them to please watch the canvas about some of the concerns that a lot of our voters had, and the step-by-step process that we went through. And then I participated in just a Senate Judiciary meeting that occurred, where they asked some of those same questions that I had asked them to go over the canvas, and some of those same questions were asked. But this one lasted 6 hours, and I did the best I could. So did Mr. Jarrett, and then on the legal side, so did Mr. Liddy, to give them a full scope of what election and how it transpired, the processes, the people behind it, the machinery, the software. And that's what I went down there for, to educate that, and then to be slapped with 2 subpoenas was, I don't know, I could be viewed that as a slap in the face, because none of those questions or concerns that they served on us were asked out with those subpoenas, and what drove those. So I had to then feel that those subpoenas were predetermined, no matter what I went there to say, no matter what our leaders down there to say, and especially no matter what Mr. Jarrett had to say. So it's to me, that's kind of telling. I have a letter that to actually this Senate President Fan that will hopefully get out to the legislature quickly. So I'm not going to make a whole lot of statements because they will be reading those. I have been clear to the public and the legislature a forensic audit will be done, but not while there is active litigation. I believe this demand is unrealistic. These subpoenas are unrealistic in their timeframes. An intrusion into the privacy of our voters, and wants us to disregard the very statutes they created. Make no mistake, I have a great feeling that this board is willing to do an audit. I've heard it now from all 5 of my colleagues. But that's not what this is about right now. There are real constitutional issues with these subpoenas. I look forward to when we can get some clarification from the court so we can move forward with a forensic audit and quite possibly other things if a court deems it appropriate within the authority of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. So I want there to be no doubt that I will be doing that. I also told my board I'm working through this process the best I can as being a chairman of the Board of Supervisors, and I will continue to do my best to put options in front of us that will get us to clarity, consistency, and confidence and trust back into our elections. And I am going to continue to work on those items. Audits, tours, everything that I can pull off so our voter can become confident again. It is really difficult to watch what is occurring on Twitter and not being able to answer for that, where people are taking what they think is the high ground because we are not speaking back. I think we are a unified voice of this board. And that is, we will be working hard. Maybe that is going to be occurring through Christmas, what I wish everybody would just spend time with their families. But unfortunately, Tom and everyone else, we might be working through these Christmas holidays to, again, confidence and trust back to election, which is the greatest Christmas present I can offer our community. So with that, I vote aye. That means the board has voted 4-1 to direct Mr. Liddy and our team to follow through. And good luck on that. I hate to say this time and time again, but I'm passionate about our election people. Sometimes we have to be defensive, but other times we need to do things to verify everything went perfect, because I still feel that we ran 3 great elections: presidential election, primary election, and general election in a pandemic. And I could not be happier for that. So with that, we are now adjourned.